There is a truth that is very hard to swallow, not because it is complicated, but because it strikes directly at your self-respect. That truth is this: you do not lack discipline because you are lazy. You lack discipline because you have been disappointed in yourself too many times. You know that feeling. The feeling when you set your alarm earlier but still hit snooze. The feeling when you start a very serious plan on Monday and by Thursday, everything falls apart. The feeling when you look at yourself and ask why others can do it while you cannot. You read books, watch videos, take notes, make promises, but then everything returns to where it was. And the most painful part is not failure itself, but the familiar feeling of failure. It is so familiar that you begin to believe it is who you really are. We are often taught that discipline is a matter of willpower, that if you are strong enough, determined enough, you will succeed. And when you do not, a conclusion quickly appears in your mind: I am weak. But there is a sentence I once heard that made me stop for a long time. It said that people do not give up because they do not want success. They give up because they no longer believe their effort will make a difference. When you fail too many times, your brain begins to learn a dangerous lesson. It learns that trying is pointless. It learns that every time you set a new goal, what waits at the end of the road is not a reward, but disappointment. And from the brain's point of view, avoiding pain is a survival priority. So every time you're about to begin, a heavy feeling appears. A very small voice whispers, "Do not bother. It will be the same anyway." This is why you feel tired before you even start. Not because the work is too hard, but because the memory of quitting is still alive inside you. You are not fighting the present, you are fighting the past. Imagine a man named Daniel. Every night he tells himself that tomorrow morning he will wake up early to exercise, and every morning he fails. At first there is a bit of guilt, then self-blame. And gradually, that feeling turns into something else: indifference. Daniel is no longer angry at himself. He simply no longer believes he can be different. When the alarm rings, his hand reaches for the phone almost unconsciously. There is no struggle at all, because in his mind, the battle ended a long time ago. The most dangerous part of lacking discipline is not that you fail to get things done. It is that you begin to build a false identity. You start to think, I am not a disciplined person. And when a behavior becomes tied to identity, you will defend it, even when it harms you. You will unconsciously look for evidence to prove yourself right. Every time you quit, you whisper, "See, I knew it." A thinker once said that people do not act according to the goals they set, but according to the image they believe about themselves. If deep down, you believe you are someone who always gives up, then every disciplined action will feel like you are playing a role that does not belong to you. And acting is exhausting. Sooner or later, you return to the familiar version of yourself, not because you like it, but because it feels safe. So, what is the real problem here? The problem is not that you lack motivation. Motivation comes and goes. The problem is also not that you lack methods. Methods only work when the person using them believes they deserve the result. The real problem is that the relationship between you and yourself has been damaged. Every time you promise and do not follow through, you break a commitment. And that commitment is not to the world, but to yourself. No one sees it. No one judges it. But your brain remembers very clearly. It remembers that your words are not trustworthy. And when the speaker is not trustworthy, the listener stops listening. The listener here is you. So do not be surprised when you say you will start again, and inside you, there is no reaction. No excitement, no determination, only a cold silence. That is the silence of depleted trust. Discipline does not collapse because you are weak. It collapses because you placed expectations that were too big on yourself, while the foundation underneath was already cracked. You tried to build a taller building without ever repairing the foundation. And every time it fell, you blamed the materials, the weather, yourself. But you never stop to ask a very different question. What in the way I treat myself has made me stop believing in my own promises? If you listen closely, you will realize that the absence of discipline is not loud. It does not shout. It quietly withdraws. It withdraws every time you force yourself to change too fast. Every time you compare yourself to others. Every time you use self-blame instead of understanding. And here is the key point that very few people say out loud. You cannot force discipline to return through inner violence. You cannot insult yourself into becoming stronger. You only make the relationship worse. Discipline only returns when trust is rebuilt, slowly, quietly, through actions so small that your ego feels embarrassed to mention them. But those very small actions are what tell your brain, this time is different. This time, I am not abandoning myself. And to do that, you need to understand one more thing. It is not that you need to try harder. You need a different structure, an approach that does not rely on emotional excitement, but on reducing inner conflict. If you look carefully at the times you quit, you will notice a strange common point. It is not that you lacked determination at the beginning. On the contrary, most of the time you started with a very strong feeling, very clear, very promising. The problem is that the feeling did not last. And when it disappeared, you were left alone in the middle of the journey with nothing to lean on. We often call that a lack of discipline. But in reality, it is a direct collision between two parts of you. One part wants to change because it sees the future. The other part wants to stay the same because it fears pain. And this fearful part is not as weak as you think. It is very intelligent. It learns from experience. It remembers that every time you pushed too hard, you burned out. Every time you set goals too high, you collapsed. So when you say you will start again, that part immediately pulls the brake. A psychologist once said that people do not resist change. They resist the pain they believe change will bring. If in the past, change always came with pressure, self-blame, comparison, then the brain will see discipline as a threat. And once something is a threat, it will be delayed, avoided, ignored. Imagine a very familiar evening. You sit at your desk. The to-do list is there, clear, reasonable, but you do not start. You open your phone. You scroll without thinking. From the outside, people will say you lack willpower, but inside, a dialogue is happening. Reason says that if you do not do it now, tomorrow will be worse. Emotion replies that you are already tired from the whole day. Reason offers long-term consequences. Emotion pulls you back to the present. And here is the crucial point. Emotion always wins in the short term, not because it is right, but because it is closer. The brain prioritizes immediate relief over distant benefits. That is not your fault. That is how we are wired. A philosopher once said that people know what is right, yet still do what is wrong, because the wrong choice hurts less right now. When you procrastinate, you are not choosing laziness, you are choosing pain reduction, reducing pressure, reducing tension. And if you do not understand this, you will keep blaming yourself for a very natural survival mechanism. The problem becomes serious when you keep winning short-term battles, but losing the long-term war. Every time you avoid, you feel lighter for a few minutes, but afterward comes a heavier feeling. Guilt, disappointment, and that feeling becomes fuel for the next avoidance. A closed loop is formed. You do not lack discipline. You are trapped in a system designed to fail. There is a story like this. A woman named Anna always struggled to maintain a writing habit. She loved writing, but every time she sat down, she felt suffocated. She procrastinated. She blamed herself. Then she quit entirely. Later, when she looked back, she realized that every time she wrote, there was an invisible voice in her head demanding perfection. Every sentence had to be good. Every paragraph had to be deep. Writing was no longer an action, but a test of her worth. And her brain did the most reasonable thing: stay away from the place that caused pain. Discipline died there, not because of a lack of desire, but because the action had been loaded with too much psychological pressure. When something becomes a place of judgment, you will not return to it for long, no matter how much you love it. This is where we need to break a very common belief. That discipline is doing what needs to be done, even when you do not like it. It sounds right, but it is missing half the truth. The other half is this. You can only do what needs to be done when the emotional cost of doing it is not too high. If every action is an act of self-punishment, you will eventually run out. A billionaire once said that success does not come from working harder, but from making the right action easier than the wrong one. But we do the opposite. We turn the right action into a mountain climb, then act surprised when we do not want to climb. You set a goal to train for an hour every day while your body is already exhausted. You demand deep focus while your mind has never truly rested. You demand discipline from a system that does not support discipline at all. And then you call it a lack of willpower. The rough truth is this: willpower is a limited resource. It drains with time, with stress, with every decision you have to make each day. When you use willpower to fight your own environment, you will lose. Not because you are weak, but because you are playing a game that is stacked against you from the start. So the right question is not how to force yourself to be more disciplined. It is how to avoid using so much willpower on things that should happen naturally. How to reduce friction, reduce conflict, reduce inner negotiation every time you begin. And to do that, you need to shift your focus from controlling yourself to redesigning the context around you, not to make you stronger, but so that you do not need to be strong all the time. In the next part, we go deeper into this, not theory, but how people who seem extremely disciplined have actually arranged their lives so that discipline becomes a consequence, not a daily battle. If you observe people who are considered highly disciplined, you can easily fall into a trap. You see the results, but you do not see the structure behind them. You see them waking up early, exercising consistently, working with focus, and you conclude that they have iron willpower. But that is only the surface. What truly keeps them going does not lie inside them, but in how they have organized their lives. There is a very ordinary morning. A man named Michael wakes up at 6 o'clock. He does not fight the alarm. There is no struggle, no inner negotiation. He simply gets up. If you ask him whether he always feels motivated, he will smile. No. But he does not need motivation, because everything was prepared the night before. His workout clothes are laid out. His shoes are placed by the door. His phone is left outside the bedroom. Each small detail serves one purpose: removing decisions. This is the point many people miss. Every decision you have to make consumes willpower. Wake up or sleep more, exercise or skip it, work or scroll online. When everything is left open, you force the brain to negotiate. And in those negotiations, the path that prefers ease always has the advantage. A scientist once said that the brain prefers familiar paths because they require less energy. Discipline, at the biological level, is not about fighting yourself. It is about creating new paths, then repeating them enough times that they become familiar. Once they are familiar, you no longer need willpower to walk them. Let us return to Michael. It is not that he has never failed, but every time he does not blame himself. He does not say he is inferior. He asks one very specific question: what in my environment made this difficult? And then he adjusts. If he stayed up late the night before, he goes to bed earlier the next day. If his morning was distracted, he moves his phone farther away. He does not fix the person. He fixes the system. Now think about the times you failed. What do you usually try to fix? You fix your attitude, you fix your mindset. You promise to try harder, but you rarely fix the context. You leave your phone right next to you, then blame yourself for losing focus. You work in a cluttered space, then blame yourself for having a cluttered mind. You go to bed very late, Then blame yourself for not waking up. You are demanding discipline from an environment that actively works against discipline. A philosopher once said that true freedom is not doing whatever you want, but not being pulled around by things that do not matter. But if your surroundings are full of things that pull you away, freedom and discipline become illusions. You do not lose because you are weak. You lose because you are surrounded. There is another story. A boy named Lucas hated studying. Every time he sat at his desk, he felt uncomfortable. His parents thought he was lazy, but later, when the family moved, he had a study corner of his own. Quiet, good lighting, no interruptions. And something strange happened. He started studying. No pressure, no scolding. The new environment did the work that willpower never could. When you understand this, you stop asking how to force yourself to be more disciplined. You start asking different questions. How can the right action become obvious? How can the wrong action become inconvenient? How can every good choice require less fighting? A billionaire once said that if you want to change behavior, do not start with emotions. Start by moving objects around. It sounds simple, but it is profound. Because every object you place somewhere is a signal, a reminder, an invitation. When you put a book by your bed, you invite yourself to read. When you put snacks right in front of you, you invite yourself to break discipline. But the external environment is only half of the story. The other half lies in the internal environment. In how you talk to yourself when you stumble. If every failure is a self-conviction, you turn discipline into an unsafe place. And no one voluntarily returns to an unsafe place. People who maintain discipline long-term are not those who never fall. They are those who fall without damaging the relationship with themselves. They treat failure as information, not a sentence. They do not say, "I am bad." They say this system needs adjustment. At this point, you may start to see more clearly. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is the result of many small decisions made earlier. Decisions you no longer have to think about when it is time to act. And when you build a structure that is good enough, something interesting happens. You begin to trust yourself again. Not because you repeat positive affirmations, but because you have evidence. Evidence that comes from doing very small things, very consistently, very quietly. In the final part, we will talk about the most important element. Not environment, not habits, but how you redefine your identity. So discipline is no longer something you try to achieve, but something you live with every day. There is a very subtle moment that most people miss. That moment is not when you start a new habit, but how you interpret that action in your own mind. You can do the same thing, but if the story you tell yourself is different, the long-term outcome will be completely different. Pay attention to the language you often use. You say, "I am trying to exercise. I am trying to focus. I am trying to be more disciplined." It sounds positive, but hidden inside is a dangerous assumption. That discipline is something outside of you, that you are only borrowing it temporarily, that it does not truly belong to who you are. A coach once said that behavior does not last because it is right, but because it fits the identity of the person doing it. If deep down you still see yourself as an undisciplined person, then every disciplined action feels like an exception. And exceptions never defeat habits. Imagine two people facing the same choice. One says, "I do not eat sweets because I am on a diet." The other says, "I do not eat sweets because I am not that kind of person." The behavior is the same, but the psychological foundation is completely different. The first person must constantly decide. The second is simply living in alignment with their self-image. So how do you move from point A to point B? How do you stop seeing discipline as a temporary project and start seeing it as a natural part of who you are? The answer does not lie in loudly declaring a new identity. It lies in the tiny pieces of evidence you collect every day. Identity is not formed from thoughts. It is formed from repeated actions. Every time you do something, no matter how small, you cast a vote for the person you are becoming. And the brain loves evidence. It does not trust promises. It trusts data. This is why goals that are too big backfire. When you set standards that are too high, you almost guarantee failure. And every failure becomes a vote for the old identity. The identity of someone who quits, someone who is not trustworthy, someone who lacks discipline. Not because you want that, but because you are unknowingly feeding it. A man named Thomas once decided to change his life. He set many goals: wake up early, train hard, work 12 hours a day. The first week, he succeeded. The second week, he started slipping. The third week, everything collapsed. What broke him was not missing the habits. It was the feeling that he was right again, that he was not the kind of person who could maintain discipline. Later, when he looked back, Thomas realized that he had tried to become a different person overnight. He was not building an identity. He was wearing an oversized coat, then acting surprised when it slipped off. Sustainable change always happens in reverse. You do not say you are disciplined and then act. You act in very small ways, like a disciplined person, and let the brain update the story about you. You do not need to train for an hour. You just need to show up. You do not need to be perfect. You just need to not disappear. There is a saying I deeply like, that your standards determine your life. But what people rarely add is this: those standards must be low enough that you do not break the relationship with yourself. A standard you can keep even on your worst days, because your worst days are where identity is truly formed. Discipline at its deepest level is not about doing more. It is about stopping the betrayal of yourself. Every time you say you will do something, make sure it is something you can actually do. Not on an excited day, but on a tired day. On a day when you do not want to prove anything. When you do that, a very quiet change happens. You begin to trust your own words. You begin to listen to yourself again. And when the speaker and the listener inside you are aligned, discipline is no longer a confrontation. It becomes cooperation. There is a question very few people dare to ask honestly. If you have tried many times and still cannot maintain discipline, is the problem truly you, or is it the way you are approaching change? Because if a method fails again and again, the reasonable response is not self-blame, but questioning the method itself. Throughout this journey, you may have realized one thing: discipline is not something you lack. It is something that has been distorted. It has been turned into a battle between the person you want to become and the person you currently are. And in that battle, you are always at a disadvantage because you are fighting yourself. But discipline in its original form was not created to torture human beings. It was created to protect energy, protect time, protect attention. It is a structure that helps you avoid having to decide from scratch every single day. When you understand this, you stop seeing discipline as a moral test and begin to see it as a subtle survival tool. There is a powerful image worth reflecting on. A river does not need willpower to flow. It flows because the terrain forces it in that direction. When the terrain changes, the flow changes. Humans are the same. You do not need to become stronger to live with more discipline. You need to reshape the terrain of your life. That terrain includes your environment, your small habits, and, most importantly, how you treat yourself when things are not perfect. Every time you stumble, you have two choices. One is to use it as proof that you are weak. The other is to use it as data to adjust. The second choice is where discipline matures. A thinker once said that freedom is not doing whatever you want, but not having to do things you will regret. Discipline, when understood correctly, is the highest form of compassion for your future self. It does not shout, it whispers. It asks you one simple question every day. What is the smallest thing you can do today to make tomorrow a little lighter? You do not need a dramatic transformation. You do not need a perfect version of yourself. You only need to stop damaging the relationship with yourself. Stop making promises you cannot keep. Stop replacing intelligence with harshness. When you do that, discipline will return, quietly, without drama, but with great durability. One morning, you will wake up and do what needs to be done without arguing. Not because you have become a different person, but because you have stopped treating yourself like an enemy. You have created a life where the right action is the path of least resistance. And if there is one final thing worth carrying with you, it is this. You do not lack discipline. You lack a system that respects your human limits. When the system changes, people do not need to be forced. They naturally step into the role they were always capable of becoming.